We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph in Meseches Sukkah. This is Sukkah Daf 28a. The Gemara in the previous Amud had asked, why doesn't Rabbi Eliezer answer the question about whether you can hang sheets in a sukkah on Shabbos? Why doesn't he answer from his halacha that he has by the shutter of a window, where Rabbi Eliezer says it's prohibited because it's considered adding on to an OLRI? So the Gemara says, Hasam over there, hud mevatel. In that case, he's mevatel the shutter of the window. He nullifies it in that place. That's why it's problematic. But here, where he's not putting it in this particular place in a bittul kind of fashion, Rashi will explain. So there, it's not exactly the same case. That's why he didn't answer the question from that particular example. Rashi over here says, over here, when he puts the shutter in the window being basically just a hole in the wall or in the ceiling, so there it becomes part of the actual wall. So hilka chavi mosif, so therefore that's considered adding on to the binyan, and it's a problem. Avol sadin, but when it comes to hanging the sheets, which they were hanging in the sukkah to prevent the heat, anon sahadi delom mevatel legabe sukkah, we know that he's not being mevatel into the sukkah. V'sofo lidlo, he's going to remove that. Hilka Rabbi Eliezer, that's why Rabbi Eliezer didn't answer the question. It wasn't obvious to him that it's a mosif on an OL, and therefore he didn't answer. He still left the sukkah because he did not approve, but he did not actually give an actual response. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer, Shashavas Begolol HaElyon. There was a story with Rabbi Eliezer that he settled in the Upper Galil, V'shoalu Shloshim Halachos Behilchos Sukkah. They asked him 30 questions in terms of the laws of Sukkah. Shtei Mesrei Amar Lahem Shamati. For 12 of them he said, I heard an answer. Shmona Asar Amar Lahem Lo Shamati. And for 18 of them he said, I did not hear an answer. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says, Chilaf Advarim, it's the opposite. Shmona Asar Amar Lahem Shamati. For 18 of them he said, I heard the answer. Shtei Mesrei Amar Lahem Lo Shamati. But 12 of them he said, I didn't hear the answer. Amru lo, so they said to him, Kol devarecha inan elam mipi hashmua. Everything you say is all things that you heard. You have nothing to say on your own. Amar lohem, so he said to them, His kaktuni lomar davar shalov shamati mipi rabosai. You've now caused me that I'm going to say something that I didn't hear from my Rebbeim. I'm going to tell you a statement that I did not hear. Number one, miyamai lo kidmani odem beveis hameresh. From all of my days, nobody got to the beis medrash before me. V'lo yashanti beveis hameresh. Also, I never slept in the beis medrash. Lo shinas keva v'lo shinas arai. Not a real sleep, not a nap. V'lo hinachti odem beveis hameresh v'yatzasi. I never left the beis medrash. Left someone there. When I left, I was the last one out. V'lo sachti sichas chulen. I never spoke regular conversation that wasn't involved in something that was a tzorech, a need, or some kind of learning of Torah. And Rabbi Eliezer continues, V'lo amarti davar shelo shamati mipi Rebbe me'olam. I never said something that I didn't hear from my Rebbe. Amru olav al Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The Gemara continues. They said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Miyomav lo sach sichas chulin. Again, he never spoke mere conversation. V'lo halach dalet amos below Torah v'lo tefillin. He never walked 4 amos without Torah and tefillin. V'lo kidmu adam beveis hamedrash. Nobody ever beat him to the beis medrash. V'lo yashin beveis hamedrash lo shinas keva v'lo shinas arai. He never slept in the beis medrash, a real sleep or a nap. V'lo hirher b'mavoas hamatunafos. He never thought divrei Torah in the dirty alleyways. V'lo hiniach adam beveis hamedrash v'yatza. He never left someone in the beis medrash when he left, meaning he was always the last one out. V'lo matzu adam yoshe v'domim. Nobody ever found him sitting silent and not doing anything. El yoshe v'shon. He was always sitting and learning. V'lo pasach adam deles letalmidav elahu biatzmo. A person never opened up the doors for his talmidim. He himself opened the door. V'lo amar davar shelo shama mipi Ravo me'olam, and he never said anything that he didn't hear from his Rebbe. V'lo amar, and he never said higia eis lamon bebeis hamedrash. Now is the time that we should get up and we should leave the beis medrash. Chutz me'arvei psachim v'arvei Yom Kippurim. With 2 exceptions, an exception on Erev Pesach and Erev Yom Kippur, then he would say it's time to leave the beis medrash. V'chein hoyer Rabbi Eliezer talmido noeg acharav, and Rabbi Eliezer, his student, he was accustomed to doing these things just like he did them. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Shmonim Talmidim Hayu Lo Lehil Hazakin. There were 80 students that Hillel Hazakin had. Shloshim Mehen Ru'uyim Shetishra Alei and Shechina K'Moshe Rabbeinu. 30 of them were so great that the Shechina was fit for the Shechina to rest on them like Moshe Rabbeinu. Ushloshim Mehen Ru'uyim Shetamud Lehem Chama Ki Yoshua ben Nun. 30 of them were so great that they were fit that the sun should stop for them like for Yoshua. Esrim Beinonim, 20 of them were average. Gadol Shabakula, and the greatest of all the students, Yonasan ben Uziel, was Yonasan ben Uziel. Katan Shabakula, and the least of all the students, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Amru olav al Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They said about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shaliniach Mikra Mishnah, Gemara, Halachos, Ve'agodos, Dikdukei Torah, V'dikdukei Sofrim, Kalim, V'chamurim, Ugzeira Shavos, Tekufos, V'gematrios. Some of these things we'll explain in Rashi, but he never left off Sukkah, Mishnayis, Gemara, Halachos, Agadita, Dikdukei Torah, and Dikdukei Sofrim, Kal v'chomer, Gzeira Shaves, Tekufos and Gematrius, Sichas Malachei Ashores, V'sichas Shedim, V'sichas Dekolim, the conversations of Malachim, the conversations of the Shedim, the demons, the conversations of Dekolim, again we'll explain. Mishalos Kovsin, Mishalos Shualim, we'll explain what those are as well. Davar Gadol, V'davar Katan, great things, small things. The point is, he knew all of these things. Davar Gadol, what's considered a Davar Gadol? Maisa Merkava, that's like the Maisa Merkava, that's the vision of Yecheskel. Davar Katan, Havayos da Abaye v'Rava. What's a Davar Katan? Those are the conversations of Abaye and Rava. L'kayim Mashanemer, this fulfills that which it says in the Pasuk. L'hanchilo avayesh v'otzroseim amale. I'm going to fill up all of their storehouses with knowledge. V'chimeachar shekatan shebekulan kach, Gadol shebekulan alachas kama v'kama. And if the least of his students, meaning Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, was so great, imagine how great his greatest student, Yonasan ben Uziel, was. Amru alav al Yonasan ben Uziel, they said about Yonasan ben Uziel, B'shah sheyoshev v'osek b'Torah, at a time he was sitting and learning Torah, kol of shepareach olav, any bird that would fly over him, miyad nisrif, would be burned immediately. Rashi over here explains his kaktuni. This was the statement of Rabbi Eliezer, you forced me to say something that I did not hear from my Rebbeim, Kolomar Tazkikuni, Lomar Davar, Agid Lachem Es Midosai, V'zuachas Mehen, meaning what he meant to say was, I'm going to say over my midos, the way that I behave, and this happens to be one of them that I do not say anything over, that I did not hear from my Rebbe. Sichas Chulin. What is Sichas Chulin? Divrei Havoy Uschok. It means just words joking around, nothing, no substance. Kolomar Mash Savik Biyadi Lomim Nevi Choleila V'Yevsher Shamru Davar Rabosai Davar Beis Hamedrash V'Lo Shamativ. His point of all this is that he was never in conversation that was not important, and it was impossible that his Rebbe's, it was impossible for his Rebbe's to have said something that he didn't hear. He was always in the Beis Medrash, and therefore he heard everything they said. And if I didn't hear something, then I'm not going to say it over, because that's the way I behave. Below Torah, what does it mean that he never walked without Torah? Below Girsa, even when he would walk, he would always be learning Torah. Chutz me'arvei psachim and ne'asiyas pischayim. On Erev Pesach, that was the one time that he would say it's time to get up from the Beis Medrash in order to do the Korban Pesach. And furthermore, he also did it because he wanted that the children should be able to sleep during the day, so that they'd be able to stay awake for the evening of Pesach. Also, Erev Yom Kippur, that was another time when he said, again, this is talking specifically about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that was another time on Erev Yom Kippur where he'd say it's time to get up from the Beis Medrash in order that they should be able to eat. Mishnah, what does it mean, Mishnah, that he knew all of Mishnah? Could go on Mishnah, Braisa, Shel Shishas Darim, that refers to the Mishnayos and the Braisas of all 6 orders of Mishnayos. And this again is going on Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that he knew Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara, Zui, Svara, Sheyatanoim, Achronim, Medaktikim, Bedivrei Harishonim, Hastum Lefarshim. Gemara refers to the fact that they were analyzing the words of the earlier Tanoim. V'litan bem tam, Kimoshasu HaMoraim. They would give reasons similar to what the Amoraim did Achar HaTanoim. Shapirshu, Divrei HaTanoim, Shelefneim. The Amoraim explained the Tanoim. The issue here Rashi is dealing with is that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a Tana. So what does it mean, Gemara? Gemara usually means something that's learned in the times of the Amoraim. So Rashi here explains that the later Tanoim would also have a Gemara. They would analyze the words of the earlier Tanoim. The Kavul and Gemara v'osadiyak shebimei nikra hashas. Again, this kind of analysis is called shas. And Rashi continues halachos. What are halachos? That means halacha l'Moshe Misinai, kagon good, v'loved, v'dofen akuma. That refers to all kinds of halacha l'Moshe Misinai, like good and lovud and dofen akuma. Shiurin, Chatzitzin, Mechitzin, Asunatios, Arava, V'nisach Hamayim. These are all the various halachos l'Moshe Misinai. Dikdukei Torah. What does it mean that he knew Dikdukei Torah? Ribuye Osios, Shaboin Lidoshben. It means the extra letters where you darshan from them in the Torah. Ribuyim and Miyutim, you have inclusions, you have exclusions. Sometimes there's an extra letter, tells you to exclude, to include, etc. Dikdukei Sofrim, what does it mean he knew Dikdukei Sofrim? Shosifu ledaknek achar ma'isa abrios, ulahachmer v'laso siog, v'yaznayim l'Torah. Dikdukei Sofrim refers to the fact that we make derabbanans that are like offense to the Torah. V'gazru gezeiros, they made decrees derabbanan. Laharchak es adam in aver, in order to distance a person from avero, d'chavasu b'bechoros, ger habalakabel Torah, olav chutz midavar echad, ein mekabel so Rabbi Yossi Omer, afilu diktuk echad, mi dikdukei Sofrim. They use the same language to talk about the gezeiros of the chachamim. And Rashi continues, Kalim v'chamorim means to say Dvarim halamedim mekal v'chomer. Like we said, he knew all the kal v'chomers. Shenindu ladon me'atzman l'choladam v'lo pirshu klum b'sinai. U'gezeira shavas, Dvarim halamedim gezeira shava. Gezeira shavas refers to gezeira shava, things that are learned from a gezeira shava. Tekufos, what's tekufos? Cheshben hila chamu levana. It means he knew the calculations of where the sun goes and the moon goes. The gematrios, he knew gematria. Dvarim halamedim beloshen gematria. Kegon shashach bavel ba'at bash. Kastim lev kamai bi'at bash. These are all the ways that you learn things through these letter combinations like at bash, etc. Sichas malachi ashare, sichas shedim, sichas dekolim. All these various conversations of malachim, demons, and dekolim. Rashi says lo yadana maihi. I don't know exactly what sichas dekolim is. If you take a look over here at the Mesoras Hashas, he says ayin ba'aruch erich sach perish avodah zara. Sichas dekolim means the conversations even of avodah zara. He knew those. The literal translation sichas dekolim means the conversation of the palm trees. And then it says he knew the mishalos kovsin. That's the parables of the launderers, umishalos shualim, and the parables of the foxes. Shayastu kadmonim loses amasla tochasam v'tolonosan bekovsim uvashoalim kagon moznei tzedek avos ochlu boser. These were parables basically that the early generations they made in order to give certain kinds of rebuke and musar, and they used to call them the mishalos of the kovsim and the mishalos of the shoalim. Havayos da Abaye v'Rava koli boilu Abaye v'Rava. That just means all the questions of Abaye and Rava have a mesafkiluhu uvechula nasan as libo. All of these questions which would be in the future, he understood it and paid attention to all of these kinds of questions. V'nasan b'em tam uvimei amoraim nishtachu. He had already given answers earlier in earlier generations to the discussions of Abaye and Rava, even though he came before Abaye and Rava, but they were forgotten in the days of the Amoraim, so they were asked again at that time. Nisraf, and finally it said that Yonasan ben Uziel, any bird that flew over him would be burned. Shayu malache asharis miskabsin saviva. The idea is the malachim would gather around Yonasan ben Uziel, l'shmoa divrei Torah mipiv, in order to hear divrei Torah, and that's what caused that the birds would become burnt. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Misha yarosho v'ruba b'sukkah v'shulchano b'soch habayis. Let's say a person, his head and the majority of his body is in the sukkah, but the table is in the house. Beishamai poslin uveis hillel machshir. And Beis Shammai say it's possible, that's a problem. Beis Hillel say that's okay. Amru lehem Beis Hillel leBeis Shammai. So Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, Lo kacha yamaisa, wasn't there a story like this? Shahalchu ziknei Beis Shammai v'ziknei Beis Hillel levaker es Rabbi Yochanan ben Achurnis. The elders of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they went to visit Rabbi Yochanan ben Achurnis. Umitzau shayu yoshev rosho v'ruba b'sukkah. They found that he was sitting his head and the majority of his body was in the sukkah. V'shulchano b'soch habayis. His table was in the house, so apparently it's okay. V'lo amru lo davar, they said nothing to him. Amru lahem Beis Shammai, so Beis Shammai said to them, Misham Rai, you think that's a proof? Afem amru lo, they actually did say to him, Imkein ho yisa noeg, if this is what you're doing, lo kayamt mitzvah sukkah miyamecha, then you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah in all of your days. So indeed they were critical of this kind of behavior. And the Mishnah continues, Noshim v'avadim uketanim peturim min sukkah, women and servants and minors are patur from sukkah. Katan she'eno tzarich limo, if you have a katan who doesn't need his mother, meaning he's old enough that he doesn't need his mother, chayiv b'sukkah. So such a katan is going to be chayiv in sukkah on a derabanan level. Ma'isa v'yolda kalaso shel Shammai hazaken upiches es hamaziva v'sikech agabe amita b'shvil katan. The Mishnah finishes off. There was a story where the daughter-in-law of Shammai hazaken, she had a baby, and so they opened up the plaster of the ceiling and they put on schach on top of the crib in order that the katan should be able to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. And the Gemara says, Menahani Mili, what is the source for this? The Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ezrach ze Ezrach. When it says Ezrach, that refers to a citizen. Rashi over here says, Ha Ezrach b'vnei Yisrael yashva b'sukkah. The pasuk says, Ha Ezrach will sit in the sukkah. So the Gemara is darshaning. Ezrach ze Ezrach. Yihavo ksiv Ezrach. It means if it would have just said Ezrach without the hey, have mashma kol toldos Yisrael anoshim v'noshim. It would have implied everybody is chayiv, men, women, etc. Everyone is chayiv in the mitzvah of sukkah. Ha Ezrach lahotzi es anoshim. But it says ha Ezrach to say that women are excluded, and kol l'rabos es hakatanim. But the word kol comes along to say that children are included. Rashi over here says, Ksiv ho Ezrach miyuman shebe Ezrachim lahotzi es anoshim. It refers to certain citizens, only the men, not the women. L'rabos es hakatanim. But the children are included. L'kamon raminan masnisa alon. Now we're going to ask on this a contradiction in a moment, that here we're including the katanim, and it's going to say that they're not included. So the Gemara says, Amar Mar, the master said, Ha Ezrach lahotzi es anoshim. It says Ha Ezrach, that comes to exclude the women. L'meimra de ezrach bein noshim bein gavri mashma. Now that seems to imply that the word ezrach without the hey would include both men and women. Is that really true? V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa, ha'ezrach, the pasuk says ha'ezrach, l'rabos es hanoshim ha'ezrachios shechayavos be'inoi. This is referring to the halacha that you have to afflict yourself on Yom Kippur. And it comes to say that even the women who are citizens, they are chayiv in this mitzvah of inoi. Rashi over here says, "Be'ino yom kippurim dechsiv tanu es nafsho seichem v'chol malacha lo sasu ha'ezrach v'hager alma hey l'rebuya yasa." So here, the letter hey, when it says ha'ezrach, is coming to include the women, and then implies the exact opposite of what we're saying. Sounds like ezrach does not include the women, and it's only the extra hey which includes them. Exactly the opposite of what we're saying over here, that ezrach includes the women, and the hey is an exclusion. So the Gemara says, Alma Ezrach Gavri Mashma. You see from this part of this halach of Inoi that the word Ezrach implies only men, and you have to have a special inclusion in order to include women. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabba says, Hilchas Ninu. Really, all of these things are just halachas. Meaning they don't derive from the psukim. It's just a halacha. The Rabbanan are just relying it upon a pasuk. They're just giving it that's a hint that is in the pasuk. Rashi over here says, Amar Rabba Hilchas Ninu v'asmechinu Rabbanan akroi. Hanach trei mili lekalim v'dershinu l'travayim mikroi. You can't learn both of these things out, meaning the halacha by sukkah and the halacha by inoi from psukim. Either a hey is going to be an inclusion, or it's going to be an exclusion. You can't say that the hey is an inclusion in one case and an exclusion in the other. Obviously, one of these halachas, whether it be inoi or sukkah, is going to be halacha l'Moshe Misinai. They were given opposite halachas. One is really learned from the pasuk. The other one is just an asmachta. So really the pasuk does imply the opposite, and it's coming for some other drasha. It's just an asmachta. In other words, one of these things is actually the true limud, and one of them is halacha l'Moshe Misinai, and they were just doing an asmachta on the pasuk. And so the Gemara says, Hai Krav Hai Hilchasa. Number one, which one is the genuine limud? Is it sukkah or is it inoi on Yom Kippur? And which one is the halacha l'Moshe Misinai? V'su, and further, Kra Lamali, Hilchasa Lamali. What do we need psukim for? What do we need halacha l'Moshe Misinai for at all? HaSukkah mitzvah saseh shazman grama. Isn't sukkah mitzvah saseh shazman grama? It is a positive time-bound commandment. V'chol mitzvah saseh shazman grama, nashim peturos. And any time you have a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, women are pater. And that's regarding sukkah. V'yom HaKippurim, when it comes to the issue of Inoi and Yom Kippur, mid Rav Yehuda Marav nafka. That can be learned from Rav Yehuda Marav. The Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, because Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, V'chein Tana Devei Rav Yishmael, and was also taught in the yeshiva of Rav Yishmael. Amar Kra Isha Isha. Pasuk says Isha Isha. We'll take a look at Rashi over here. Hai Kra v'hai Hilchasa v'su lamali Kra lamali Hilchasa. Hai Kra hai minai mimashmusa. How do you know what's from a pasuk, what's from the regular meaning of the pasuk? V'hai lami mashmusa dekra, and which one's not the real meaning of the pasuk? Dilu Kra chilufa mashma lami Hilchasu. That really the pasuk is the opposite. We're learning from Halacha l'Moshe Misinai ditmar v'su lamali Kra lamali Hilchasa. And the Gemara asks for the number one. You don't know which one's Halacha l'Moshe Misinai and which one's a pasuk, and we don't even need Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Lo b'sukkah lifter v'lo b'inoi l'chiyav. By sukkah, it's obvious that women are pater. You know it anyway. And by inoi, it's obvious that they're chayiv. Number one, nashim peturos b'parakam de kedushin mefarish. We said in the first parak of kedushin that women are pater from mitzvah saseh shazman grama, so it's obvious they're pater from the mitzvah of sukkah. We don't need sukkah more halacha l'Moshe Misinai. V'yom Kippur, when it comes to Yom Kippur, lo sasehu. Yom Kippur is a negative commandment a person's supposed to afflict. V'karesu, and it's also a mitzvah of kares. V'chol mitzvahs lo saseh. Anytime there's a negative commandment like don't eat, etc. Bein zman grama, bein lo zman grama, whether it's time-bound, whether it's not time-bound. Nafkalan b'kedushin mid Rav Yehuda dechayavos. We have a limud in kedushin from Rav Yehuda that they're chayiv, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis.